I'd like to start by wishing you a very happy Feast of Tabernacles, family. And I'd like to follow that up by saying, wow, what a bunch of weirdos we all are. Think about it. You are here right now in this room listening to this message, but why? You're here because you believe that the God who created the universe, the all-powerful, infinitely wise being who sustains everything that lives and moves, you believe that that God has instructed you to set aside 10% of your yearly income so that you can travel to a place like this, to be in a room like this, listening to a message like this, sitting beside a bunch of other weirdos who believe the same thing. The Feast of Tabernacles puts a real spotlight on our weirdness. But it's not just this week that makes us weird. We are weird all year long. We are consistently weird. We're dependably weird. For example, we don't believe in lying. We don't do it even when it makes us look better. We don't do it even when we're sure that no one would find out. Outside of these walls, that's weird. We don't believe in lashing out at people who have treated us badly. Not even when the opportunity is right in front of us. Not even when we have the power to just humiliate someone. Outside of these walls, that is weird. Or take the example of the Sabbath. I remember in high school, my friend group always had a hard time understanding the Sabbath. They respected it, but it always confused them. You know, we'd have conversations like, wait, so some Friday nights you can come hang out with us, but other Friday nights you can't hang out with us, and it depends on what the sun is doing in the sky? Eventually they settled on, okay, so Jeremy just can't come over if the streetlights are on Fridays. They were nice about it, but I promise you, they thought I was weird. There is a 24-hour period of time that you treat as holy time, one that you actively defend from outside influences like work and the cares of this world. And then, you come to the Feast of Tabernacles every year, and instead of treating it like a big week-long vacation, you come to church every day with a bunch of other weirdos like you. Let's take a look at Romans 12, verse 1. Romans 12 and verse 1. I'm willing to bet that you've heard this verse before. It's not a new one or an unusual one, but I want to look at it from the context of a world that looks at us day in and day out and says, what a bunch of weirdos. It doesn't mean they hate us. They might even tolerate us. They might even like us, but they're always going to think we're weird. Romans 12 and verse 1, Paul writes, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. There are two big concepts I want to focus on today, and that's what it means to be conformed, what it means to be transformed. They're not the same words. They both have to do with a change, but they're very, very different concepts. And in a world that wonders constantly why we're so strange, they are two very, very important concepts. Let's start with conformed. The Greek word that Paul uses for conformed is a word that has to do with taking something and shaping it with a mold or according to a pattern. So if you've ever made Jell-O, you've conformed something. If you've ever used a cookie cutter to make a shape out of dough, you've conformed something. If you've ever used a stencil to trace a letter or to draw a shape, you've conformed something. But here's an important detail. When you conform something to fit a mold or a pattern, what changes about that thing? It's not the substance itself. Jell-O is still Jell-O no matter what shape you make it. Dough is still dough. Clay is still clay. Molds and patterns are not about changing the inside of something. They're about changing the shape of something. It's an external process that changes how something looks, not what something is. No matter how many times you reshape something, the substance of it doesn't change, just the outward appearance. The world wants you to conform. As a whole, as a giant faceless metaphor, the world doesn't really care what you are on the inside. The world cares about the shape that you have on the outside. The world wants you to fit in. It wants you to talk like it talks and act like it acts. And when we don't, when we're weird because we won't lie to take advantage of a great opportunity, or because we won't come into work on the Sabbath, we grind gears. We make other people uncomfortable or annoyed or frustrated. And there's pressure in those moments to just become a little more like the world, because it seems like it would just make things so much easier, right? Paul is saying, don't do that. Don't let the world define what normal looks like. Don't let it define what you should look like. Don't let what's out there be the mold that shapes you. Or in other words, don't stop being weird just to make the world happy. I was lucky in high school. My friends never pressured me to do things their way. They never asked me to stop being weird. But you know what? It sure would have been easier if I wasn't weird. It sure would have been easier if I didn't have to consult a sunrise and sunset chart every time they invited me to do something over the weekend. And so even though my friends never actually applied any pressure to me, the pressure to change still existed. The pressure to just be like everybody else around me. To talk about the kind of things that they talked about. To laugh at the kind of things they laughed about. To do the kind of things that they did. And some of those things I could do, right? They weren't all wrong, but I couldn't do all of them. Some of those things I knew that God had said, there's a line here, don't cross it. And so every interaction I had with my friend group in high school was a decision that I had to make about, am I going to be weird or am I going to be normal? And I don't know who you are or where you're from or what your story looks like. I don't know the kind of things you have to deal with on a daily basis. I don't know what challenges you face. But I do know this. You feel some kind of pressure. You feel a pressure to stop being weird and to start being like the world around you, to conform. Being weird is hard, right? Being weird requires you to go against the flow, to do something that isn't normal, that stands out, that makes other people look at you and say, huh. And that's the best case scenario, right? Because they might also start throwing stones, and those stones can be metaphors or they can be real stones. But family, what is this week that we're celebrating right now, if not a reminder that the world outside does not have the answers? The world outside those doors is falling to pieces a little more every day. The world is temporary. It's passing away. And by the time we get to the days that this Feast of Tabernacles pictures, the world as we know it will be gone. Should something so broken be the thing that shapes us? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But what's the alternative? And at first glance, it might seem like the logical thing is to say that, well, God wants us to be conformed to something else, a more righteous mold that we can fit into. But God's not interested in just changing our outward appearance. He's not interested in just cramming us into a different baking dish so he can give us a different shape. He wants to change our substance. He wants to transform us. That's what the other word that Paul used in Romans 12 means. He uses a Greek word, and it's a word that we have borrowed and adopted into English and Dutch and French and German, Italian, Russian, Spanish, and probably other languages too. Paul used the word metamorpho, which in English gives us the word metamorphosis. And today, metamorphosis is the word that we use to describe what happens to a caterpillar inside its cocoon. I'm embarrassed to admit that I have gone through most of my life without having any idea what happens to a caterpillar as it becomes a butterfly. All I knew is that a caterpillar goes into a cocoon and it leaves as a butterfly. And I think I sort of assumed that most of the process had to do with growing wings because, they're really close in body shape. Isn't a butterfly just sort of a slimmer caterpillar with wings? If you know anything about butterflies at all, you'll know that's not even a little bit true. Here's what happens inside the cocoon, or more accurately, the chrysalis. The caterpillar liquefies. It doesn't just lose some weight and sprout some wings. It turns into soup. It sits in that chrysalis as a puddle of caterpillar goop. And then something incredible happens. Inside the caterpillar's body are these little discs of cells that don't dissolve into soup. And they contain the instructions that will take all the goop of the caterpillar and rebuild it into something entirely new. The butterfly that comes out of the chrysalis has not been conformed, but transformed. Now, granted, I don't think that Paul had butterflies on his mind when he was writing the book of Romans, but this is the rough meaning of the word. It's a total change, a complete transformation, not just a reshaping of what we are on the outside, but a fundamental reworking of what something is. It's a metamorphosis. The Feast of Tabernacles that we're here to celebrate is a great time to think about the new spiritual bodies that we're going to have in the kingdom of God. You know, that's something we're going to talk about. Maybe you already have talked about wherever you are. Physically, that transformation happens on the day that Jesus Christ returns to the earth. But spiritually, the transformation process is happening now. God's Spirit is working with us to transform us. You and I, family, we have been called to present our bodies as living sacrifices, as something holy and acceptable to God. We aren't being conformed to this world, but transformed. And how? The verse goes on in Romans 12:2. It's by the renewing of our minds. If you've been baptized into God's church, then His Spirit is at work in you right now. It is helping you as a carnal human being to begin to think and act more like your Creator. You aren't going to come out of this process as just a caterpillar with wings tacked on. You're going to come out something different, something new, something better. And so the world during this process sees you as something weird, something that doesn't fit, something that won't conform to its mold. And you'll never fit, because while the world is trying to press you into its mold, God is changing you from the inside out. And that is the change that matters. That's a change worth dedicating our physical lives to. The world, it's passing away. It's a lousy mold. But the transformation that God offers us will last for eternity. And that, I think, is something worth being weird about. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.